In this example, we're going to look at some of the powerful tools that will enable us to edit clipart in Aspire. We're going to look at taking 3 pieces of clipart that comes free with the software, and we're going to show you how we can easily edit them to create a brand new model. So let's go to File, Close, and then we'll go and create a new file. So we're going to work with a single-sided job. I'm going to set my width of this to be 48 inches, height is going to be 6, material thickness, we're going to work with 1 inch thick material. I'm going to set my Z0 position off the material surface, XY datum position in the centre of my job, modelling resolution, as we're working with quite a large surface area, we're going to set that to be very high, and then for the appearance we're going to choose Canadian maple. And we could go ahead and press OK. So let's come up here to our view control. We're going to look at tiling our windows horizontally. That way I can see the 2D view at the top and I can see the 3D view at the bottom there. So as I said in the intro, we're going to look at bringing clipart that comes free with the software. We're going to look at editing them to create the mantle assembly that we saw earlier. So how do we bring clipart or components into our job? Well, one way of doing it is by going into the Modeling tab, and we could use this icon here, Import a Component or a 3D Model. Now from the Mantle Assembly Project folder, I'm going to look at bringing in Flourish 118, go ahead, press Open. You'll see it's positioned that within my job over here. Okay, so I'm just going to take that, I'm just going to position that into the centre. You can see by looking at the cursor, I'm aligned to the dead centre of my job vertically and horizontally, and so I can just click that in place. Another way for me to bring clipart into my job is by going to the clipart tab. And so by selecting the clipart tab, I'm able to add clipart in to my library folders. So you can see I've already installed the clipart folder that comes with the software. And you'll see here that now when I select one of these subfolders, you'll see the clipart is updated according to what's in that folder. Another way for me to access clipart on my computer is to browse my local files. So again, you can see here that I'm in the public documents Vectric files, and under clipart I've got access to all of the free clipart that comes with the software. So let's go back to the library browser. I'm going to look under the decorative option here, and this will display all of the free clipart within this subsection here. Okay, so I like the look of this. So how do I bring the clipart in? Well, I could double click that and that'll bring it into the centre, or I could simply drag into the 2D or even into the 3D view, and you'll see it's been added there. Another way that I could bring clipart into my job is just by using the option to right click on the clipart. So for example, I like the look of this Flourish 73B. I'm going to right click here, use the option Import to Level, Level 1, and it's been added in the centre of my job there. So let's just move that over to the left hand side. So now I have the 3 components that I need to create my final mantle assembly like we saw earlier. So this stage is all about getting our rough layout. So we're going to look at sizing, moving, rotating or flipping these components into a rough layout that we're happy with. Now, as we're creating a symmetrical design, I'm actually only concerned with the left hand side of my job space. There's no need for me to do both the left and the right, when ultimately anything that we create on the left hand side here, we're ultimately just going to mirror it over as one of the finishing steps at the end. So let's go into the Modeling tab, and for the purposes of this video I'm just going to right click to rename these components. So I'm just going to right click, rename, we'll call this one A, right click here, and we're going to rename this one, we're going to call this one B, let's select this one, right click, we're going to rename this one, and we're going to call this one Center. And so now we can look at sizing the components up. So we're going to take this component here, and we're going to go to Set Selected Object Size, and in this case what I'd like to do is I'd like to change the height of this to be 4.8. Okay, I'm going to use the option Link XY so it scales in proportion, We'll go ahead, press apply. We can see it's just made that a little bit bigger. Okay, so I like that. Staying in the form, I'm going to go and select the next component. And here we're also going to give this a height that's a little bit bigger. So we're going to give that a height of 3.5. Link XY is checked. Press apply. We can see that that's been resized there. Okay, so now we're just going to close the form down. Now thinking about the layout that we've got here so far, what I think we could benefit from is actually flipping this component horizontally about its own center point. So if that's selected, let's go over to the mirror selected objects option. Okay, so we want to use the flip horizontal. We do not want to flip that about the job center, and we don't want to create a mirrored copy. All we want to do is just flip it over. So you can see by flipping horizontal, it's now flipped that for me, and it's in a position that I like. So let's just close that down. Okay, I'm just going to use this option here, Zoom 2D View to mouse drawn box. So all I do here is just simply draw a box just around the left side of my job, and it's just going to focus that area on that selection that I did. And in the 3D view, I'm just going to hold down Control to pan my view across, and I'm just going to zoom in just so I can see this a little better also. So I'm going to take this component here, and I'm just going to hold down Alt just to keep that in line. So Alt keeps it aligned to its horizontal or vertical. Okay, so just move that out the way, and I just want to move that back in so it's just touching the end of this component here. And so I'm actually just going to take that and then just nudge it down. I think that's a little too much, so I'm just going to roughly position that in place. Okay, so I quite like that. And what I've noticed is that I've got quite a nice flow going through the two components now. So you can see we're starting at the centre here, coming down. As we meet this new component, we're joining it back up, and then we're coming down again. So you can see we're starting to get this pattern. I'd like that pattern to continue throughout the rest of the model. So now let's have a look at this component here. So select it, and what I'd like to do is I'd just like to rotate it 90 degrees. So let's go into the rotate selected objects. I'm going to rotate it about its own center point, type in 90, press apply, and you'll see it's made that change there. We can close that down. Okay, so it's not really quite what I was looking for. The flow doesn't really suit what we already have here, so I could maybe benefit from actually flipping this vertically. So if that's selected, let's go over to mirror selected objects. Again, uncheck flip about job center, uncheck create mirrored copy, use the option here to flip vertical, and then we could just close that down. So then I'm just going to select it, just going to manually rotate it just by pulling on the blue handle there, so that enables me to rotate the part. And I'm just going to nudge that over to the right hand side, and so you can see now we've got our centre point, we're coming down, we're going back up again, coming down, and then going up. So I quite like the flow that we've got in this design here. So now that we've got the basic layout, I'm going to start to think about getting the exact layout. So we're really focusing on the actual silhouette of the part here. I'm not too concerned with the heights of the part just yet. I'm only concerned with the actual silhouette of our overall design. So one thing to help me just see this or visualise this all a little bit better is if I set the combine modes of all of my components to merge so that they're all blending in with each other. So to do that, I'm just going to right click, go to the combine mode, set it to merge, and we'll do the same for the centre, set it to merge, and now we can see everything is now blending into one another. So looking at the design, we mentioned about the flow going from the centre, coming down, and up. You can see we've got a little bit of an interference here. Now, ideally, I don't want this swirl area to be a part of this design. So I need to look at removing that. Now one way of doing this is I could simply draw a vector around the area that I don't want and use the option to clear everything inside of that vector. Or I could just look at an easier way and just look at using the sculpting tools to do that. So to do that, I'm just going to take this component here. We're going to go into the sculpting tools. Okay, so having the option show grayscale background enables me to see all of the other components within my design, which is handy because I can see where I need to clear up to. Now to remove material, we simply go into the undo brush, and you'll notice here it says hold shift down to erase. So when I come over with my brush, hold down shift and click, you'll see that we're just getting rid of that material there. Okay, and that's as much as I need to get rid of. So now when I go ahead, press keep and then press OK, you'll see now that we've lost that swirl area, and you can see that the flow of my overall design looks a lot better without that interference of the swirl section of this flourish here. So let's have a look at everything as a whole. So I'm going to use the option here, zoom to fit. I'm going to click in the 2D view and also use the option zoom to fit there. Okay, so it's not too bad, we've got lots of detail going on here, and we sort of lose that towards the end. We haven't got much going on compared with the rest of our design. And it's quite typical in designs to have repeating elements thrown in. So we might look at taking something from an existing part of our design and creating a copy of that to stick on the end over here. In particular, this area here. So I'd like to cut this out and attach that to the end of our flourish just to finish that off. And that'll be quite nice, having the sort of repeated element of it in the centre of our design as well as at the ends of the design as well. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is draw a vector around the area that I'd like to keep, and I'm going to look at using this option over here, clear area of selected component outside selected vectors, and that's going to essentially remove everything outside the vector that I draw up. So before we draw up that vector, let's just maximise the 2D view, then we'll just use the option here to box select the area that we want to zoom in on. And so it's this area that we want to keep here. Now before we draw that vector, let's just go to the edit snap options here. Now as I'm tracing around quite an intricate shape, I'm going to set my snap radius to be at its lowest. We could go ahead and press OK. I'm also going to turn off smart snapping, also going to switch off geometry snapping. Then we could go into the drawing tab, use the polyline. Again, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more, and then here we're just going to simply sketch in a boundary around the part that I'd like to keep. And then I'm just going to press tab to close that vector, close that down, select my vector, we'll put it into node edit mode so that we can edit that. I'm just going to insert a point by pulling that out just so we completely clear the component there, and then we're just going to zoom in over here. I'm just going to bring this node down there and this one down here, and I'm fairly happy with the boundary that we've got there. So let's just put that in normal selection mode, use the option here, zoom to fit, and then we'll go and tile our windows horizontally. Now before we clear everything outside of this vector, we're just going to go and create a copy of our component. So with that selected, use the option here, copy, into the modelling tab. With that component selected, and hold down shift, select that vector, and use this option, clear area of selected component outside the selected vectors, and you'll see that it's removed everything outside that vector boundary. So now I can take that vector, I can delete it, I can take this new shape we've got, just move it over to the left hand side, and then we could right mouse click and we'll use the option to paste in the original component like so. So let's just go and select over on the left hand side. So I'm just going to box select just to zoom in there, and in a 3D view I'm just going to zoom in using the scroller of my mouse, then holding down control, I'm just going to pan my view across. So now what I'd like to do is just position this end flourish. I'm going to manually rotate that like so and roughly position that over to the right hand side there. Okay, with that selected, let's just go to set size. I'm just going to increase the height of this to be 2.5 inches, link XY is checked, press apply, close that down. Then we're just going to zoom in the 3D view just to tweak with the layout here. So I'm just going to nudge that to the left. Okay, that's a little bit too much, so I'm just going to manually just drag that in. Okay, it's not too bad. Quite like the way that looks. So we could go ahead and then just zoom to fit there, and then we'll do the same for this one up here. So now that we have the exact layout or the silhouette, what we need to do now is think about the exact heights of each of these components, whereby we need to make sure that we give each one of these components a height that's relative to whether it's in front, behind or blending in to its neighbouring component. So to do this, we're going to maximise the 3D view. I'm just going to zoom in on the part using the scroll of my mouse, holding down Control to pan my view across. And I'm going to take this centre component here by double clicking it. I'm going to click it again to put it into transform mode, and then I'm going to click on this blue square that you can see here, and that's going to bring up the component properties form. So here it's displaying its current shape height, and I'd like to increase that to 0.45, then press space to enter that in. And so we can see by increasing that height we've really brought out the detail there. So with this form open, I can just go ahead and double click on the next component, and that will update the form according to the component we have selected. Now in this case what I'd like to do is again increase the height just to really enhance the detail that's in that component. So let's just up the shape height to 0.4, press space to enter that in. Okay, I like the detail that we've got there. However, this swirl area here, really I'd like this area to look as though it's sat underneath this component here. Now there's one way I could do this, and that's by applying a fade, where we'll fade the component down from the left to the right hand side. But to do that, it would mean that I'd sacrifice a little bit of the detail that we've got towards the right hand side here. So what I'm going to look at doing instead is looking at splitting the components so we have two separate entities. So let's just close this form down. I'm just going to use the option here to tile the windows, and then we're going to go into the drawing tab, and then I'm just going to go into the 2D view and just zoom in on that swirl area here, and we're just going to draw a vector that represents the area that I'd like to split. So into the polyline tool, I'm just going to roughly sketch in a shape like so. Then we're just going to join that up at the end by pressing tab, and I'm going to close that down. And I'm going to take this vector, shift and select this component here, go into the modelling tab and use this option here to split the selected component using a selected vector. So if we do that, you'll see it's now split that component in two. I can see that in my component tree. I have BA and I have BB. And so now would be a good time to just rename some of the components that we've got in our component tree here. So I'm going to right click on this component, we're going to rename this one, call this one B, select the swirl, right click, rename, we're going to call this one swirl, and the centre, I'm going to rename that, get rid of that duplicate one from where we copied and pasted the original back in, and then this component here, we're going to rename that, and we're going to call this one end. So let's zoom in on the 3D view. I'm just going to press Control to pan that over. And we're just going to focus on this area here. So this is where we left off. So now we've split this component into two. I like the detail that we've got in there by inputting that shape height of 0.4 in there. And this component, what I would like to do is just look at applying a fade going from the left to the right, just so it looks as though it's sat underneath this flourish that we've got in the centre here. So to do that, I'm going to select it, I'm going to open up that properties form, I'm just going to move that out the way, I'm just going to move that over there, I'm going to apply a fade, I'm going to set that from left to right, so you'll see that I have a number 2 next to my anchor now, so that's telling me to input my second anchor point, so you always go in the direction that you'd like to fade the component down. So you can see it's fading that down 50% what it was originally on the right hand side. I want to do, I could look at increasing that, and we can see now it looks as though it's sat firmly underneath that component. If I wanted to, I could do that a little bit more and just click into the space just so we can see how that looks. Okay, so I like the look that we've got there. Then we could move over to the left hand side. I'm just panning my view across here, and now we'll take a look at this flourish here. Again, we're going to look at increasing the height of this. I'm going to make this 0.4 just to really bring out some of the detail there. And I can see that it's fairly close to the heights of this component here. Okay, so I may want to just look at just fading this area down on the right hand side. So again, we're going to look at applying a fade, so I'm going to use the fade option, so check that. I'm able to set my first anchor point, which is going to be on the left hand side. Now I select my second anchor point on the right hand side. It's going to do that at default of 50%, and we can see that's just enough to look as though it's underneath this flourish that we have here. Okay, so let's just put that back in C, and then I'm just going to zoom in and then pan my view across over there, and now we're going to look at this flourish here. So I'm just going to increase the height ever so slightly. We'll make that 1/4 of an inch for our space to enter that in, so you can see it's just filled that out a little, and I quite like the way that looks. However, we can still see it's actually protruding into the flourish that we have here. Now ideally I don't want this coming through here, and I don't ideally want to shrink the height of this down or apply a fade to it either. So I want to look at using the sculpting tools to actually blend these two together so it looks seamless and they're actually part of the same thing. So to do that, let's just close that down and just maximize the 3D view. I'm just going to zoom in and then pan my view across to the area that I want. I'm going to shift and select this component also. Then we're going to go and use the sculpting tools. It's going to warn me that we need to bake this. That's okay, I'm happy for this to be one component at the end of my sculpt. So I'm going to go and press OK. So we're going to start by looking at the smooth tool. So I'm going to come over here. I'm just going to use the left arrow key just to reduce the diameter of my smooth brush. And I'm just going to brush over that area here. And you'll see that we're just smoothing that intersection into our component that we have. Okay, you'll see that we've pretty much got rid of that area there. Okay, then I might want to just use the smudge tool just to smudge some material into this curvature over here. I also might want to just bring a little bit of this out, maybe just push it back again. Okay, let's just go into the twiddle views to take a look at that. Okay, it looks good. We've smoothed that blend where we had the two components intersecting each other, and we've got rid of that, smoothed it out, and we can see it looks pretty seamless now. So let's just press keep, and then we'll OK that, put that back in the Z view, and then we'll just zoom in a little, take a look at the overall part as a whole. Okay, just one final height adjustment that I'd like to make. I'd just like to lift this area up on the left hand side just to give it a bit more height, as everywhere else seems to have quite a nice height about it. So we're just going to look at lifting up the left hand side. So to do that, we're just going to look at applying a tilt. So we're going to select that, select it again, open up that properties form. This time we're going to apply a tilt. So we're going to set our anchor point on the right hand side. We want to tilt it from right to left, and I'm going to click for my first anchor point on the left hand side, click for my second anchor point, and then if we just tilt our view, and then we could just see how much that's going to tilt up. Okay, so just that might be a little bit too much, maybe 1 degree. That seems to just balance all of the heights out there, and we're still not interfering in this section here. Okay, so I like that the way that that looks. Let's just close that down. We'll put that back in Z view. So now we're at a stage where all of the overlapping areas have the correct heights. Where we looked at altering the shape heights, we applied tilts and fades in order for us to create the look that one component is either in front or behind its neighbouring component. So now we're at a finishing stage where we just need to look at mirroring everything on the left hand side over to the right hand side. So to do that, I'm going to select this component, shift, select the next component, shift and select that swirl. And in hindsight, looking at this group or this collection of components, this may be useful as a piece of standalone clip art. So before I go ahead and mirror this over to the right hand side, I may want to look at grouping this collection of components and exporting it out as a piece of clip art that I could use at a later date. So to do that, I'm just going to right click, use the option here to group those components, and then I'm going to right click on that group and I'm going to rename that. We're going to call this one left flourish, and then I'm going to right click on that group again, and this time I'm going to use the option here to export as 3D clip art. So in the Mantel Assembly project folder, I'm going to export that into there, so left flourish.3D clip. I could go ahead and press save, and I could go ahead and access that piece of clip art that we've just exported out at a later date. And the really nice thing about exporting grouped components out is that when I re-import them back into the software, it still retains all of the grouped information, which means that I can access all of the individual components that make up this group. So now with this group selected, let's go and create a mirrored copy over to the right hand side. So we want to flip about job center, we want to create a mirrored copy, and we're going to flip that horizontally. You can see it's created that copy there over onto the right hand side, and I can close that down. Let's just rename this group, so I'll rename that. I'm just going to call this one right flourish, like so. And so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to create a component based on everything we can see here in the 3D view. So I'm just going to go onto level 1, I'm going to right click, I'm just going to use the option here to insert a new level. And making sure that that level is the active level, I'm going to use this option up here to create a component from visible model. That will essentially create a component based on everything that we can see in the 3D view, and it's going to insert onto level 2 as that's the active level. So let's do that. Okay, so you can see we've got that visible model there, and if I just switch off level 1, we'll see that we now have one component that was the combination of all of our parts put together on level 1, which we can see here. So with this component selected, we could just alter the size of this. So here we're just going to go and alter the height of that. I'm going to make that 5.5, link XY is checked, press apply just to make that bigger, just to fill out the space there. Then we can close that down, and again we could go and look at exporting this out as a piece of 3D clip art. So right click, export as 3D clip art, and here we're just going to call this one Mantel Flourish. I'm going to add that to my project folder, press save. And so it really is a good idea to get into the habit of exporting your components out as 3D clip art with any edits that you make or any new pieces of clip art that you make, as it's just a way for you to add to your own personal clip art library. And by doing that, if we go into the clip art tab, if I go to my local files, and if I find the folder, so Mantel Assembly here, if we just take a look, you can see that the two pieces of clip art that I exported out have automatically been added to my clip art tab. And so that concludes this tutorial on how to assemble and edit clipart to create new models in the software. So let's go to File, Save As in the Project folder. I'm just going to name this Mantel Assembly 3D Modelling, press Save, and you can access that from the Project folder.